Hi, so I'm Patricia Haggard, and this is my daughter May.
I think that especially with today's technology, there's a lot of things that all of us around the world can now relate to.
Okay.
So it is both one culture and millions of cultures at the same time.
Yeah. I just love the thought of like someday, because we always tend to, we see the earth as the big piece and that we see all these different pieces. But I think if you could look at it from a bigger perspective, we would see the whole.
I would expect to read that culture's literature.
Okay.
I would want to read Ethiopian books by Ethiopian authors.
Okay. Research we could do.
Because the unique thing about places like America is that there are so many different people who come to America from all these different backgrounds. And it's one thing that we should take pride in as Americans is that there are so many different backgrounds here.
Yeah.
And that so many people have different experiences.
Right.
That's one thing that I would love for students to take away from cultural classes is that differences do not have to divide us. Quote by Audre Lorde on the lines of, learn to use your differences to hold yourselves together. The important thing is to acknowledge your biases.
Sure.
So one might acknowledge that in American culture, tattoos are not something that's super taboo anymore. You might think somewhere in Asia where tattoos are still pretty taboo, like if anyone who has a tattoo, people associate that with criminals. So you might take that into consideration and be like, even though I don't think this is a big deal, this is a big deal to that culture. And so you have to take that into consideration when you're going into another culture, is that you have to put aside your beliefs or at least acknowledge why you think something is weird in order to really understand that my biological anthropology professor told us. And what he said is, you don't have to agree with it, you just have to understand it. Nothing wrong with relating to the characters in your book, but if you're only taught to find books that you relate to, your perspective is going to be very, very narrow in the world. You're never going to be able to see beyond your own world perspective.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to challenge students beyond that. It's like, there are ways you're going to be able to relate to every character.
Yeah.
And there are ways that you're not going to be able to relate to every character.
Well, and I do think that's something kind of neat that by finding a character that you wouldn't relate to quickly gives you that opportunity to relate to them on a different level, right? So even though you may not be homosexual, you still might relate to the problems of being left out or bullying or, that kind of thing. And so I feel like that's another great way to interact with the text and feel like, oh, other people have that feeling too.
That especially young people are going to have a hard time with is putting aside the identity that they've been growing up with their entire life, especially if they have not had a lot of outside influence, if they have been in one place for their entire life, if they have socialized with the same people for their entire life. It's going to be really hard for them to put aside what they've grown up with, these core identities and morals that they have been raised with throughout their entire life, to put that aside and accept something else. That sounds a lot like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's speech, The Danger of a Single Story, of assigning an entire culture the one perspective.
A good goal of the class, or one of the good goals of the class, is to open people's minds to, even in America, not everybody's the same, right? Everybody has different perspectives, and you can't judge other people's experiences or their choices on yours.
Do this. Your initial response to something different isn't wrong.
Right.
It's your initial response. Like, my anthropology professor used the example of, you know, what if I said, let's go get a puppy burger, a burger made out of, you know, puppies. They're so delicious, you know? Your first response might be, what? Why would you eat a puppy? That's so wrong, you know? But to other people, that might just be totally natural. Like, it's meat, you meat.
Right. And you,
so your initial reaction isn't wrong, but you can't sit in it.
gotcha.
You have to move beyond it.
Okay. And that might be where those cultural response questions come in, is really like starting to think about what questions do I have
You have
about
to ask
this?
yourself, why do I feel wrong about
Okay.
this?
Yeah.
Why am I having this reaction?
Okay.
If you
I like
ask
that.
yourself why, you're going to be able to understand more about yourself culturally. Like, what has my culture taught me? My culture has taught me that
Eating
dogs aren't
puppies.
food. They're pets, they're friends, they're
right.
companions.
Right.
So you shouldn't eat them,
Right.
right? Whereas this person's culture has taught them, if it's meat, you eat it.
It's meat.
You know?
Yeah.
An artifact is a piece of culture.
Okay. Okay.
So it can be anything that is important to that culture, and it can be the sticks that they use to start fire.
Sure.
It can be the pots that they carry their stew in.
Sure.
It can be the musical instruments they use. It can be their paintings. It can be their.
So if you
lot of different
dug
things.
up something somewhere and you
Yeah.
found a book,
That would
that's
be
an art. Last year I started with learning what culture is and what is your culture,
Mhm.
which is always a great discussion with European Americans, because they literally say, I don't have a culture.
Which is so harmful to European Americans. It makes them so much more susceptible to misinformation and to cults, because now they don't really feel like they belong anywhere, because they don't feel like they have a culture. Yes, European Americans have a culture. Before I had any chance to interact with people who were really different from me, I just kind of assumed, you know, we all had the same experience. Of course, now being older and delving into feminism and into sectionality and all that, I understand that that's not true, and that there are many different experiences and many different perspectives.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing that we kind of talk about at school, is how, you know, you have your own culture in your family, right? The next door neighbor doesn't have the same culture as you, right? And then we have a culture in our city and in our state and in our school, and you know, each of those cultures are different, and you're a piece of that culture. But and then all of those things pulled together creates your personal culture. The culture taught me
so it's like
to do that.
understanding how you've been socialized.
Yeah. As I was teaching, was like, this is this author's perspective of their culture. And it doesn't mean that you even talk to their sibling. They might have a different, you know, and so I like that it's one piece of their culture. So just like if you were doing an anthropology dig and you dug up a spoon, that gives you a little bit of information. And then you dig up a toy, and that gives you another information. So you have to put all the things together to get a bigger picture. I wonder how much like author research we should do to be able to understand where the author is coming from.
I would encourage that strongly. I think if there's one thing you should really hammer home into students is, you know, these are real people's lives.
Right.
People live like this.
Right.
People thrive in these ways. Yeah. And just because you do it in a different way doesn't mean that you get to have the last say over what's right or wrong.
It's better. Yeah.
There's not really a bad in culture.
Yeah.
It's just different.
Yeah.